The night Grace Marlowe finally asked for help began like every other shift, quiet, polished, predictable on the surface, and terrifying just beneath it. The upscale coastal lounge where she worked had that kind of beauty that fooled strangers into thinking nothing bad could ever happen here. Soft jazz, warm amber, lighting, glasses clinking with quiet elegance. But Grace knew better. Beauty was just camouflage. And tonight, she didn't have the luxury of pretending anymore. She approached the corner table with steady hands that did not match the panic hammering inside her chest. Roman Hale sat exactly where he always did, alone, composed, a dark silhouette carved out of authority and silence. He wasn't loud, wasn't flashy, wasn't the kind of man who needed to be. People simply adjusted around him. The way a room instinctively shifts for something immovable. Grace placed his whiskey on the table, and with the practiced ease of a woman who'd learned to survive by never drawing too much attention, she slid a folded note beneath the glass. The motion was so smooth, it could have been mistaken for routine. No one watching would have seen anything unusual. Except she wasn't alone. 2 men sat by the front window. They'd been coming in for days, never ordering more than coffee or a single drink, never talking to anyone, and never not once taking their eyes off her. Their attention felt like a weight pressing into her back. Their stillness was unnatural. Their presence was wrong. They were the reason she'd written the note. Grace stepped away, her breath shallow, her mind racing. She prayed Roman would read it before those men realized she had made her move. He lifted the glass. His thumb brushed the paper. And then he unfolded the note, with the same calm, deliberate certainty he brought into every room. Grace watched from across the lounge, pretending to polish a wine glass. Her pulse pounding so hard, she thought she might faint. She saw Roman's eyes move across the ink, though his face never revealed a single emotion. Not even curiosity. Inside the note were 12 words that might save her life or end it. I'm 7 months pregnant. They found me. Please. Help. That was it. No names. No explanations. Nothing that would compromise anyone but her. Roman lifted his gaze. And in that moment, something in the air changed. Everything grew quieter. He didn't frown. He didn't ask questions. He simply looked around the room once slow. Controlled. Assessing. It felt like watching a storm gather without a sound. And Grace felt the shift all the way down her spine. He'd understood her. He'd understood the danger. And he'd understood that she wouldn't have written that note unless she'd run out of all other options. Grace returned to the bar, pretending to refill a bottle, though her hand trembled visibly when she thought no one was looking. She closed her eyes for a moment and let herself breathe, but only for a second. Because the memory of how she ended up here came crashing back the moment she tried to calm her mind. She saw her brother again, smiling, tired, calling her late at night to warn her that something was wrong at Northbridge Logistics, the company she once worked for. She remembered the way his voice cracked when he told her to leave, to disappear, to trust no one. She saw him promising her they'd meet in a week, after he handed evidence to federal agents. But he never made that meeting. They found his car in a ravine. They never found him. That was the day she learned what Northbridge really was, a trafficking front, hidden beneath warehouse walls and shipping codes. The day she learned that her pregnancy, once a bright and fragile hope, made her a target for men who saw her unborn child as leverage, evidence, insurance, a bargaining chip. She'd spent months running, changing jobs, changing apartments, watching every face, every car, every shadow, trying to stay alive long enough to bring her baby safely into the world. But the men by the window meant she had run out of time. She forced herself back into the moment. Roman had leaned back in his chair, one hand resting casually on the table. But she recognized the subtle shift in his posture. He was alert now, dangerously alert. And that alone gave her a flicker of a feeling she hadn't allowed herself in months, hope. Then she saw one of the men by the window rise. Just a slight movement. A tilt of the head. But Grace knew exactly what it meant. They were preparing to move. Her throat tightened. She brushed her hand against her belly, feeling the faint pressure of a small, fragile kick beneath her apron. A reminder that she didn't have the luxury of freezing. She had promised her brother she would survive for her baby. For the family they had lost. For everything Northbridge had taken from them. Grace stepped toward the hallway. But before she could reach the corner, one of Roman's men, a man she had never seen before, but recognized instantly as part of his quiet perimeter, blocked her path just long enough to murmur, "Wait." Then he let her pass. Roman had already begun to move. He rose from his table not abruptly, not loudly, but with a controlled, lethal calm that sent a ripple through the room. A few customers glanced over, unsure why they felt the sudden tension. The two men by the window certainly noticed. Grace felt their attention sharpen like blades. Roman gave a subtle signal to another man standing near the bar. Grace knew the moment had come. She turned sharply, accidentally knocking over a tray of glasses. A sharp crash filled the lounge. Conversations halted. Heads turned. And in that split second of confusion, those few precious seconds, Grace slipped through the service hallway and pushed through the back door. Cold night air rushed over her skin. Fog rolled in from the ocean, swallowing the alley in a heavy grey blanket. Her breath came in fast bursts as she ran toward the street where she usually parked her car. But she didn't reach it. A shadow detached itself from the far wall. A tall man stepped forward, blocking her path. His stance told her everything she wasn't escaping this way. Grace stumbled back, heartbeat slamming in her throat. Her hand instinctively covered her stomach. The baby kicked again. Fear or instinct, or both, and bile rose in her throat. Behind her, another set of footsteps approached. They had her cornered. Then she heard the low, powerful hum of an engine. A black SUV glided into the mouth of the alley. Headlights off, moving like it belonged to the night itself. The back door swung open before the vehicle had fully stopped. Roman's voice came through the fog calm, steady, uncompromising. "Grace, get in. Now." No hesitation, no room for debate, just certainty. She hesitated for only a heartbeat long enough to understand what stepping into that SUV meant. Trusting a man she barely knew. Letting go of the last fragile illusion of control she'd been holding on to. But the man blocking her path took a single step forward. And the choice disappeared. Grace ran. She climbed into the SUV, breath breaking into a sob as the door slammed shut behind her. Roman slid in from the other side, motioning to the driver without looking away from the alley. "Go." The SUV surged forward, swallowing her panic with the roar of the engine. Through the back window, the two men watched them disappear into the fog. Grace pressed a trembling hand against her belly, trying to steady her breath. Whether she trusted Roman Hale or not, he had chosen to protect her. And that choice had already changed everything. The SUV carved through the fog like a blade, its engine a low growl swallowed by the night. Grace kept glancing out the rear window, expecting any moment to see headlights cutting through the mist behind them. And every time she looked, she saw nothing, but she felt something. A presence, a tail, a threat closing the distance even if she couldn't see it. Roman didn't need to look. He already knew. His jaw was set, his hands steady on the wheel. He drove like a man who understood the architecture of danger every corner, every blind spot, every tactic used by hunters who preferred shadows. Grace held her belly with both hands, cradling the life within her as the SUV swerved through a nearly deserted industrial road. Her breath came tight and shallow, Not from the speed Roman drove fast, but never recklessly, but from the knowledge that this was no longer about survival. It was about seconds. Inches. Decisions that could save her child, or cost everything. Roman spoke only once during that first stretch of the escape. Who knows about the baby? His voice was quiet. Controlled. Stripped of everything, except focus. He wasn't asking out of curiosity. He was mapping out the threat. Grace swallowed hard. My brother knew, before he disappeared. A nurse, at a clinic. My sister's friend who helped me get the sonogram. And now, you. Roman nodded once. A single motion. Barely noticeable, but she felt something shift, an intensity in him, sharpening like a blade. That's not enough people for this kind of hunt, he said. Which means Northbridge has been watching you longer than you realized. Grace's heart clenched. She'd feared that, but hearing it aloud made her feel exposed in a way she hadn't felt before, not even when she first saw those men watching her from the window of the lounge. They want the child, she whispered. Roman didn't answer. He didn't have to. The truth hung between them in the thick, fog-drenched air. After another series of turns, more calculated than frantic, the SUV rolled to a stop behind an abandoned warehouse at the edge of the harbour. It looked empty. Silent. Forgotten by the city. Yet Roman stepped out with complete certainty. As if this place existed, precisely, for nights like this one. He led Grace inside, through a rusted side entrance, and down a narrow flight of metal stairs. The deeper they went, the more insulated the world felt. The sounds of the harbour dulled. The fog disappeared behind thick concrete walls. And for the first time in months, Grace felt something close to safety. The underground room was cold, plain, and functional. Concrete floors, a steel table, a cot tucked in the corner with a thin blanket. Several crates of supplies were stacked neatly, and the air smelled faintly of old stone and seawater. It wasn't warm. It wasn't comforting, but it was secure. For Grace, that alone felt like a blessing. Roman walked the perimeter once, checking locks, checking shadows, checking silence itself. Then he turned to her, nodding toward the cot. Sit. Breathe. You're safe for now. Grace sat. But her hands wouldn't stop trembling. The tremors weren't from cold. They came from the sudden realization that she had finally stopped running, if only for a moment. Roman gestured to one of his men, standing by the stairwell. Quiet orders were exchanged, too soft for Grace to catch, but within minutes. More people arrived. Men in dark clothing, moving with discipline. They assembled a perimeter around the safe house, with the efficiency of soldiers. Roman didn't send someone else to bring her food. He brought it himself, warm soup. A bottle of water. A protein bar. He placed the tray beside her, and stepped back, without a word. Grace stared at him, surprised by the simple act. She hadn't expected kindness, especially not from a man like him. But maybe kindness wasn't the right word. It was responsibility. Duty. A code he lived by, but never spoke aloud. When he noticed her, struggling to sit up straighter, he adjusted the cot with one hand, lifting it just enough to ease the strain on her back. He didn't comment. He didn't wait for gratitude. He just did it, and moved away. Grace watched him from her little corner, watched the way he stood by the stairs. Back straight. Weapon holstered but ready. He didn't pace. He didn't fidget. He simply existed as a barrier between her and danger. A silent wall. Unshakable. And for reasons she couldn't fully understand. She felt safer with Roman in the room than she had felt in any place since the day she started running. After a long stretch of silence, Grace found her voice. "Why help me?" she asked softly. Roman didn't turn around. He didn't soften. He simply answered, "Because men like them don't get to hunt pregnant women in my city," he said. "Not while I'm breathing." The words hit her, with unexpected force, steady. Unembellished. A final. He didn't say it to impress her. He said it because he meant it. Grace didn't thank him. Not yet. Not because she wasn't grateful, but because gratitude felt too small. Too fragile for everything he had risked tonight. Hours passed. The dim emergency lights flickered now and then. Outside. The air seemed to grow heavier, as if the city itself were bracing for something. Grace drifted in and out of restless sleep. And then at 2:14 a.m., a sound shattered the fragile quiet. Glass. Not the gentle sound of a dropped bottle or a misplaced glass, but the violent, explosive shatter of a window destroyed by force. Grace jolted upright, heart slamming against her ribs. Above them, footsteps thundered sharp, coordinated, purposeful. Voices barked orders in clipped tones. Boots slammed against the upper floor, the kind of sounds she'd feared for months. Roman moved before Grace could even fully wake. In 2 steps. He was beside her, gripping her wrist in a hold, firm enough to anchor her, but gentle enough not to hurt. "Stay behind me," he whispered. "Don't let go." Every word was steady. Absolute. Grace clung to him with her free hand, as he led her through a back corridor she hadn't noticed before. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into complete darkness. Gunfire erupted above sharp. Terrifying. Real. Grace stumbled. But Roman didn't let her fall. His grip tightened, pulling her close behind him as they navigated the pitch-black path with unnerving certainty. His steps were sure. Hers were frantic. Yet he never slowed. He guided her through turns she couldn't see. Down a narrow hall. Through another heavy door. Another explosion rocked the building. Dust rained from the beams overhead. Grace choked back a cry, pressing her free hand against her belly to shield her child. Roman stopped only when they reached a final metal door. He pushed it open with a force that made the hinges groan. Cold, wet air slammed into them, harbor air, thick with fog. The world outside was a blur of grey and shifting silhouettes. Waves lapped against wood. The boards beneath their feet creaked. "Keep close," Roman said quietly. "We're almost there." Grace followed him onto a slick dock, feeling the fog close around them like a living thing. She heard footsteps in the distance, shouts, someone closing in. But ahead, barely visible, lay a small boat engine humming low. Waiting. Roman placed himself between Grace and the danger behind them as they crossed the final stretch of dock, and when gunfire cracked the night, he turned instinctively, shielding her with his own body. Grace felt the heat of him, the strength of him, the unyielding wall he became. They reached the boat, and Roman helped her in before jumping aboard himself. The vessel surged away from the dock, disappearing into waves of fog while the world behind them vanished into grey. Grace clutched her belly, breath shaking. Roman watched the harbour fade, eyes sharp, posture unbroken, under gunfire, under threat. Under darkness, he had protected her. The boat sliced through the fog until the world behind them disappeared entirely, swallowed by grey and distance, and the kind of silence that comes only after violence. Grace sat, wrapped in a blanket Roman had wordlessly handed her, the engine's low vibration humming beneath her seat. The baby shifted lightly inside her, as if sensing that, for the first time in months, the danger was drifting farther away. Roman didn't speak. He stood near the helm, a shadow among shadows, watching the fog ahead with a vigilance so constant, it felt like a physical force holding the night at bay. When they finally reached the island, the boat slid against the dock, with gentle precision. Roman guided her toward a small path, leading up to a house perched on the edge of the hill, quiet, isolated, untouched by the world's chaos. A refuge carved out of darkness. Inside, Grace felt the weight lift from her shoulders in a way she hadn't expected. There were no footsteps echoing behind her. No cold eyes tracking her movements. No men waiting in cars. Just the soft rhythm of the tide and the faint sound of wind brushing against glass. Roman stayed near the door while she settled onto a couch. He didn't hover. He didn't ask questions. But he watched her with a silent intensity that wasn't possessive, only protective. As if ensuring she wouldn't disappear in the dark. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime. Sleep claimed her easily. She didn't dream of running. She didn't dream of fear. She dreamed of nothing at all. When she woke hours later, Roman was still there, leaning against the doorway. Arms folded. Silhouette framed by moonlight. He looked as though he hadn't moved, as though he'd kept watch over her the entire night. Grace whispered. "Why are you still here?" His voice was low. Steady. "Because you needed rest. And someone had to make sure you got it." There was no softness in his tone. No attempt to comfort. Yet she felt comforted anyway, while Grace slept again through the following days. Roman waged a quiet war. Not with bullets. Not with brute force. But with information cold. Devastating. Undeniable. He contacted no one directly. Yet messages moved through channels so discreet that Grace would later wonder if the entire city bent itself around Roman's will. Evidence began to surface, files her brother had tried to expose. Encrypted documents he'd hidden. Recordings she never knew existed. These were delivered anonymously to multiple agencies across 3 states. Each package timed to arrive simultaneously. In the span of just 1 week, Northbridge's empire collapsed. Warehouses were raided. Leaders were arrested. Their entire network crumbled under the weight of their own secrets. Grace learned all this secondhand from murmured conversations between Roman's men. From muted news reports flickering on the island's old television set. Roman never mentioned his involvement. He never sought credit. Never looked to her for validation or gratitude. If she hadn't known better, she would have believed it was coincidence. But she knew better. Every victory against Northbridge carried the silent imprint of the man who had rescued her from the alley. Weeks later, Roman moved her to a private medical facility far north of the city, a serene place surrounded by pine trees and the soothing hush of winter snow. It felt more like a retreat than a clinic. Built for secrecy and healing. Staffed by people who asked nothing and understood everything. Grace gave birth to a healthy baby girl just before dawn. The room was warm. The lights dim. And the only sound was the soft cry of new life that filled the air with a kind of fragile hope Grace had never dared to imagine. Roman wasn't there for the birth. He never intruded on moments that weren't his to claim. But she learned later he had stayed awake all night outside the building, waiting for word that both mother and child were safe. He visited her only twice in the weeks that followed. The first time, he arrived carrying a small bag of baby clothes, soft cotton, neutral colors. Practical, but beautiful. He placed it on the table and nodded once in greeting. Grace said his name, wanting to tell him everything she felt. Everything she owed. Everything he had saved. But before the words could gather, he simply said, "You don't owe me anything. Just live." Then he left as quietly as he'd come. The second visit was even briefer. He stood near the doorway, watching the baby sleep in Grace's arms. His expression was unreadable, some mixture of relief, pride, and something softer he quickly concealed. He placed an envelope on the counter. Inside were new identification documents, a financial foundation, and the location of a safe home far from the city. When Grace tried again to thank him, his response was the same, firm, final, and impossibly gentle. Beneath the rough edges, "Just live." "Grace, that's enough." She did. Over the next 3 months, Grace rebuilt her life, step by careful step. She moved into a small cottage, overlooking the grey Atlantic waters. A place so peaceful, it felt like a new world entirely. Neighbors kept to themselves, which suited her perfectly. She spent her days learning to be a mother, learning to breathe again, learning what it felt like to exist without fear. But Roman never left her thoughts. He had become like a shadow stitched to her memories, a reminder of the night everything almost ended, and the man who refused to let it happen. Then, on a quiet afternoon, a knock sounded at her door. A courier. No smile. No small talk. And no return address. He handed her a package and walked away before she could ask a single question. Inside the brown envelope was a photograph. A candid shot, taken from a distance. Grace standing on her porch, with her daughter nestled against her shoulder. Both of them illuminated by morning light. Grace didn't remember seeing a camera. And she didn't need to. On the back, written in Roman's handwriting, it was 6 words. Safe. I'll check again in 3 months. Ah. Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that she had been protected long after she left his world. That night, after putting her daughter to sleep, Grace printed her own photograph, one she had taken earlier that day. In it, she held her child close, both of them smiling, both of them finally free. On the back, in careful script, she wrote, "Thank you for giving us a life." She mailed it the next morning. 3 weeks later, her phone buzzed with a single text from an unknown number. "You're welcome. Stay safe." And then the number disconnected. Grace stared at the message for a long moment, absorbing everything it didn't say. Everything it didn't need to say. Some men protect with words. Others protect with their lives. She had found the second kind. And because of him, her daughter would grow up free. Thank you so much for spending this time with me and for listening to Grace's journey. If this story touched you, if it made you feel something, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves emotional, meaningful stories. And I would truly love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? Which part of the story stayed with you the most? Your support helps these stories come alive. And it means more than you know. Until next time, stay safe, stay warm, and remember, sometimes, the quietest protectors leave the biggest impact.